Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. As President-elect Donald Trump's transition to power now begins and Democrats grapple with the uncertain fate and future of their party, I spoke with President-elect Trump earlier this afternoon by phone as he and his team begin the transition process. The president-elect outlining his priorities for day one of his administration. Among them, taking action at the southern border, including implementing what he has called his mass deportation plan, regardless of the price tag. The president-elect also describing to me his calls with some 70 world leaders since his victory, including Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel and President Zelensky of Ukraine, two conflicts that loom large over the campaign, adding that he had not yet spoken with Russian President Putin, but believes he will. Mr. Trump also shared details of his conversations with President Biden and Vice President Harris since the election, calling them, quote, very nice calls, both respectful, both ways. Our conversation came after President Biden spoke from the White House today for the first time since the election, echoing remarks made by Vice President Harris yesterday, pledging a peaceful and orderly transition in contrast to the turmoil and the insurrection from 4 years ago.
Yesterday, I spoke with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory, and I assured him that I'd direct my entire administration to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition. Campaigns are contests of competing visions. The country chooses one or the other. We accept the choice the country made. I've said many times, you can't love your country only when you win.
Now, the president-elect clearly buoyed by his victory, telling me in our conversation today that he believes he has a, quote, mandate to bring common sense back to the country after his decisive win, which saw him flip at least 4 battleground states, shattering the Democrats' blue wall and presiding over a national rightward shift that has taken the Democratic Party. Democrats, meanwhile, left to figure out what went wrong and what comes next, as Vice President Harris urged supporters to continue the fight during her concession speech yesterday.
In our nation, we owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States. And loyalty to our conscience and to our God. My allegiance to all three is why I am here to say, while I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign.
Now, of course, whether Democrats have any power in Washington to continue that fight all comes down to which party controls the House, which remains uncalled at this hour. But Republicans appear to have the easier path to winning a majority than Democrats. Republicans will control the Senate with at least a 2-seat majority, potentially more, once races are called in Arizona, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. It all means that President-elect Donald Trump will be taking the reins with potentially few checks against his power as he embarks on fulfilling promises made during his campaign. A long list that, if implemented, would fundamentally change this country and its institutions on the economy, foreign policy, and immigration. Joining me now from the White House is NBC's Mike Memoli, and Vaughn Hillyard is in West Palm Beach with the very latest from the Trump transition. Mike, let me start with you. It was notable in my conversation with President-elect Trump. He talked about the fact that Vice President Harris and President Biden both emphasized to him that they want a smooth and orderly transition. He said he totally agrees 100%. You heard that in their speeches, really emphasizing the importance of a peaceful transfer of power. It comes, of course, against the backdrop of what this country experienced 4 years ago, which was not a peaceful transfer of power. Mike, what's the thinking inside the administration right now?
Well, Kristen, I think we can predict that this 74 days before Donald Trump is sworn in as the next president of the United States will at times have some bumpy moments in this transition. It's almost inevitable that there will be conflicts and some tensions as these teams try to work with one another to prepare for this handoff of power. But it is striking to see how in the first 48 hours, both sides, and all 3 sides, in fact, have been trying to put their best foot forwards and act in a civil fashion, right? We've seen, as you illustrate from your conversation with the president-elect, as we even see in some of the statements from members of his team, usually very sharply worded, have all been very gracious and very positive at this stage. We saw the vice president yesterday, and then we saw President Biden today doing everything he could to both try to reassure his supporters, his staff, some of those who voted for Vice President Harris about the fact that there will be another day here, but also to try to put what we expected, I think, frankly, from President Biden. He's a person of norms and traditions who is going to extend every bit of graciousness to Donald Trump that he feels he was not extended 4 years ago. It's a sort of implicit contrast that has been a hallmark of President Biden. But I want you to listen to part of what the president said, in which I think he could send a message while still striking a positive tone. Take a listen.
I also hope we can lay to rest the question about the integrity of the American electoral system. It is honest, it is fair, and it is transparent. And it can be trusted, win or lose. I also hope we can restore the respect for all our election workers who busted their necks and took risks at the outset. We should thank them.
So, Kristen, you were with me at the White House 8 years ago. We remember just the shock of Obama staff at the time. Of course, President Biden was then the vice president. He experienced that as well. It's a different level, I think, of surprise and shock at this point, not necessarily because they had expected Vice President Harris to win. I think they certainly had hoped so, but because I think they fear what he might represent now, where he was much more of an unknown 8 years ago. So this is really the undercurrent with which President Biden has to proceed now to try to set the stage for this handoff of power. Absolutely.
And within that handoff of power, President-elect Trump telling me that the two had agreed to meet to have lunch in the near future. Mike, you know, I've been talking to sources within the Democratic Party. The finger pointing has already begun. I was talking to one Democratic lawmaker who said this is a real moment of reckoning, that the Democratic Party, and as another source said, has got to do some soul searching to figure out how this decisive victory by Donald Trump was possible. What did they miss? What are you hearing in terms of that finger pointing that's already starting to take hold within the Democratic Party?
Yeah, it really started on Tuesday night as I was sharing with some of my sources what we were seeing in the exit polls, which pointed to a much closer result than many had hoped for. And very quickly, the first question was raised whether President Biden should have stayed in this race. I think the much more prevailing sentiment was, should he have stepped aside much earlier? Should he have even announced he was running at all? It was really interesting to hear Karine Jean-Pierre at the press briefing today. And if you look at some of the polling that showed President Biden with such a negative approval rating in this country, that the views of the economy were so negative, the White House press secretary tried to sort of broadly speaking say that this is not a problem unique to President Biden. She pointed to elections in democracies all over the world since the pandemic that show incumbent parties, incumbent administrations suffered pretty much across the board. And so I think one of the arguments that's most interesting from the Biden perspective is that because Vice President Harris took pains to try to distance herself from the president, no one was making a positive argument about what this administration did, essentially conceding the economic issue to Trump, and that was clearly decisive on Election Day.
A really fascinating point, Mike Memoli. Thank you for that, Vaughn. Let me turn to you. I know you're working your sources trying to get the very latest on the Trump transition, which is now officially underway. I tried to get some details from President-elect Trump, didn't get very far. I asked him, for example, if Susie Wiles, someone who has managed his campaign, is one of the top choices for chief of staff. He certainly had high praise for her, talked about the fact that he thought she would be a very good pick. What are you hearing? Have any decisions been made yet?
Right, this is the moment where there are a lot of names swirling about. Those names that are going to be very legitimate contenders to be added to the administration, but then also those that are sort of at the last minute trying to throw their names back into the equation. And that's what we're actively, I know as a team, Kristen, trying to do is sort through those realities. There has been already a transition team that has been in the works now for the last several weeks, even before Donald Trump's election this week. And it's led by Howard Lutnick and Linda McMahon. And those are the two individuals. I'm told Howard Lutnick is really focused on the personnel side. Linda McMahon really focused on the policy side of this, that are getting ready for just 2 months from now when Donald Trump takes the reins of a White House that is expansive, not only needing to fill the cabinet posts, but also the 3,000 political appointees that ultimately staff out those departments and those agencies. And I want to let folks just take a look at some of the names who we at NBC News are told are, in fact, under consideration here in Palm Beach to go into those key cabinet posts. When you look at Secretary of State, you have the likes of Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who we are told is under the consideration, but also the likes of Rick Grinnell, who was the former acting director of national intelligence. Over at the Pentagon, Senator Tom Cotton was under consideration, but publicly is now taking himself out of the running for contention. You also have, though, the likes of Congressman Mike Waltz of Florida, who was a Green Beret and somebody who was a frequent presence on the campaign trail alongside of Donald Trump as well as on the TV airwaves. The big one, of course, is also going to be the next Attorney General. Donald Trump has big ideas for what his AG he wants him to execute on come 2025. And we are now told here this afternoon that there are at least 3 names who are under serious consideration. That being, number one, Mark Paoletta, who was the former general counsel to the OMB in the first Trump administration, and then 2 other names who are maybe more publicly recognizable. That includes the likes of Matt Whitaker, who served as acting attorney general during his first term after Jeff Sessions left the AG post. And then also, I'm told Eric Schmidt by 2 sources, the senator from Missouri, is under consideration. He has also been traveling in recent weeks with Donald Trump, the now president-elect. Over at DHS, we're told that Chad Wolf, who was the former acting DHS secretary at the end of his first term, is under consideration. So, as you said, there's a lot going on. Susie Wiles, that was an important question to him because she was one of the 2 campaign managers, and we didn't see actually that many palace intrigue stories over the last 2 years of his campaign. And the large part was because of the way that Susie Wiles ran the campaign. From sources that we talked to, a great many would be eager to see her fill that post in order to ensure that there's a clean transition into the actual White House, Kristen.
All right, Vaughn, Hillyard, great reporting. As always, keep us updated if you get any new developments while you're there. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.